When do you cut and when do you boost? Now, I know when to do it, so I want to go over how I personally go about it, and hopefully it helps you out. Let's talk about cutting first. Typically, when I get a track, a source tone, I end up cutting what I don't want first. Typically, I'm going to be using a broader Q value and an EQ, and I'm going to be removing stuff typically in the mid-range initially. That's not always the case, but usually a lot of stuff that you don't want is going to be in the mid-range. If your source was very dull sounding, this is going to clean it up quite a bit. Now, as you're cutting, other issues are unfortunately going to rear their ugly head out, and then it almost becomes a game of like whack-a-mole. This is where you continue to cut as you see fit. When you hear those like really stubborn, narrow frequencies, that's when you switch a Q value to something more narrow, so you can more appropriately treat that rather than, taking a broad Q value and taking out more frequencies that you really need. You can do as much as you want or as little as you want. Like, at the end of the day, this is all subjective. Mixing is an art. In some cases, you might need to do a narrow dynamic cut for those like random rogue frequencies that jump out only, occasionally, like on a vocal. When a certain word and a certain pitch is hit, it just like jumps out. That's where a dynamic cut will be very helpful. So you could just notch that out only when it's an issue. And once you're done, there's a good chance you might think it sounds good as is. You might not need any boosting at all. That's the case for me personally. But to act like you should never really boost and it has no value is kind of silly. So I want to go over boosting, how I go about it, and just common ways to use boosting. Ideally, you want to boost when you've made all of your cuts. When you've done all your cuts and your track is still lacking, that's where boosting can really help. A very common thing to do is like when your track still sounds dull, would be to boost with a high shelf. Where it starts is really going to be up to you. 12K is for more air. You obviously don't have to go there, but there's a lot of tracks that can benefit from it. Vocals, guitars, drums, the list goes on. A lot of tracks could benefit from a high shelf boost. Is your source thin sounding? This is where a low shelf or, a more broader Q value bell on the low end can help beef up your sound. Kick drums often can benefit from this if they sound a little too clicky, not enough low end. Boosting the low end with a bell or a low shelf, that could be helpful. Is your bass not cutting through? Using a more kind of narrow Q value bell in like the 1K area or the 3K area can really help get your bass to cut through. It doesn't have to be super narrow, but something that's a little bit, more narrow than like a 1. Now, in many cases, you'll find that you might not even need to do any of the boosting. Like the cutting was done well, your source tracks were good, so you don't need to boost any high end or low end. But I feel like there's always at least 1 or 2 tracks that could benefit from some sort of boosting. So it's definitely helpful. The always cut and never boost is not good advice. So let's just go over how this should look briefly. We're not going to do a whole mix tutorial here. What I have is some bass guitar. And what I've done is I've done a lot of cutting primarily. Things like, this low cut right here. And then we've got this low pass filter over here, kind of just like funneling the bass a little bit more into the mid range where we're taking out some of this like nasty stuff here. It's a little bit hard to hear, but we're rolling it off. We've got some low end here that I'm just kind of rounding off. So we're bringing the bass a little bit more into the territory I want it to be. And then there's some stuff like 300 hertz. This was just like resonating throughout the whole mix in like a not great way. When you're doing these mix moves, you should be listening to, your instrument with the whole mix playing. And that's what a lot of this stuff here was doing. We're just getting rid of some of this muddiness that didn't sound great. And we've got some narrow peaks over here, taking out some of those like harsh frequencies. Like I was saying, the a more narrow Q value. We're getting rid of some of this garbage that it was cutting through the mix too much. I don't want a harsh sounding bass. But we're also boosting about 1K. This is to help boost the bass and, get it to kind of fit through the mix. And after all that, we got a nice sounding bass guitar. Doing both boosting and cutting. One last thing, we're going off the cuff here. Don't worry about phase if everything sounds good. When you go on the internet and you look up boosting versus cutting, people start talking about phase and all this other shit that doesn't matter. If it sounds good and you can collapse your track in mono and everything still sounds as it should, there's no reason to be worrying about like phase issues. Like, I don't know too much about the science, but like EQ is a lot of phase shifting frequencies and such. But if what you're doing sounds good, don't even worry about it. I wanted to point this out. You don't need to worry about it, but if you do go digging on the internet, you're gonna find people talking about phase and stuff like that. If it sounds better after your EQ changes, that's all that matters. Don't worry about phase. Linear phase EQ can be helpful, but like 99% of the time, you're never gonna need to touch something like that or worry about phase. This was a brief overview on cutting versus boosting and kind of how I personally go about it. It's not the end all be all facts here. This is just what I've, learned in my years of mixing, and I hope that you found it helpful. And I'd like to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Did I miss something? Did you find it helpful? I definitely would like to hear from you down below. If you did enjoy this video, a like goes a long way. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I do hope to see you in the next video.